Hello and welcome to INSS conference on 30th anniversary of Russian-Israeli diplomatic relations. My name is Daniel Rakov and I'm a research fellow at Russian Studies program of the Institute of National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, Israel. The current panel discussion is dedicated to the economic dimension of Russian-Israeli relations. And in the following hour, we intend to make a SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of these relations. We will try to understand the main pillars of the economic interaction between the two countries, characterize the current state of affairs, identify main deficiencies, and suggest possible cues. Our panel includes an extraordinary expertise on this subject. Three of our four panelists had written insightful pieces for the economic section of the edited volume of articles currently being published by INSS and MGIMO University Moscow, called 30 Years of Russian-Israeli Full Diplomatic Relations, Past, Present, and the Future. We have here with us in the panel Dr. Dmitry Mariasis, the head of the Department of Israel and Jewish Community Studies in the Oriental Studies Institute, Russian Academy of Sciences. Dr. Mariasis is the leading authority on the issue of Russian-Israeli economic relations, especially in the innovation realm. Not only does he represent an academic excellence, but also he is involved in practical work of building bridges between the Russian and Israeli business communities through his involvement in Russian-Israeli Business Council. And I must confess that for many years, he's also a great partner of Russian Studies program of INSS, of which we are grateful. Mrs. Yelena Margovsky-Lotem is Senior Energy and Economic Analyst at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Between 2013 and 2017, she served as a counselor for economic and energy affairs at the Israeli Embassy at Moscow. Today, Yelena will present views that do not reflect any official position. Dr. Konstantin Simonov is Director General of National Energy Security Fund in Russia. Additionally, he is a professor in the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation, where he heads the Department of Political Sciences. He is also a prominent expert and commentator in Russian media when energy meets politics. Dr. Elizaveta Yakimova is a research fellow in the Israel and Jewish Community Studies Department of the Oriental Studies Institute of Russian Academy of Sciences. She specializes especially in Jewish communities in the post-Soviet state. And let us turn first to Dr. Mariasis. Although looking into the breakdown of the Russian trade with the Middle Eastern countries and North African countries, Israel is one of the main trade partners of Russia in the region. Overall, Russian-Israeli economic relations are a small fraction both of Russian trade turnover and the Israeli one. In your article, you claim that there is a great potential to uncover. Could you characterize the current state of relations and pinpoint the main problems and obstacles in it?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'm honored and pleasure to be in this conference among high-level experts. For many of those I know for many years, and Elizaveta works with me, and our joint program with INSS is a very important for Oriental Studies Institute, which I represent. And with Yelena, we met not once when she worked in Moscow, and I must say it was very interesting and positive relations we had then. So it's nice to meet. With Konstantin, we're not, I know his works and I know the Institute, but unfortunately we haven't met yet, I think, in person, but there's still a place in future for it. Well, as you said, you know, when I was asked to write an article, I was in a kind of like ambiguous state of mind, because on the one hand, we've developed a very interesting and positive relations, both in politics and both in economics. Since 1994, when the major basics of the agreements and different kinds of treaties were created that created a framework of our bilateral relations, we've developed greatly. but it was the low basis start development. It means that since between 67 and 91, we didn't have any relations. So when we started in the 90s, we had a huge gap to cover with the development. So we're very positive on it. We're very positive. We have a multifaceted relations with state to state, with business to business on the one hand. On the other hand, I would characterize our relations today in general in economics as a stalemate. Look at the data, look at the breakdown. Our general scheme is raw materials for technology. It means that for many years, Russia main export to Israel is different kind of raw materials, power and raw materials. And on the vice versa, we receive some technological components, machinery, and even agricultural goods, and so on and so forth. But still, if you look on the data 15 years ago, and if you look at the data of the 2020, or even the two-thirds of this year, this particular year, 2021, you'll see more or less the same proportions of numbers and of the breakdown between of our goods and services. Of course, the pandemic, the COVID-19 distortions now are playing back. Now we see, if we compare 2020 to 2020 now, we see that there is a huge development, but because it's a post-COVID development. It's like we're coming to our common like say picture, common market picture. But if you look at the numbers, you have this kind of billion-dollar trade between the two countries, couple of billion-dollar trade between the two countries. It's almost nil. The two parties are involved for many years for the consultations on the future, even not consultations now, it's a full-scale negotiations on the free trade area agreement. I remember when we was Yelena were consulting each other on the initial stage of when it were consultations. And now we're on the full-scale negotiations, but still we are negotiating, and we haven't concluded this agreement for 5-6 years, and I don't see any breakthrough in this. Maybe Yelena and our Israeli colleagues know something that I don't know, but I don't see any particular breakthrough in this issue. And I think that a major obstacle is technical, because there are some technicalities involving that Israel has to sign this agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union with different countries, where Russia is leading country, but not the only one. And of course, it makes the negotiations difficult. But my major concern is that even though if tomorrow morning we wake up and the agreement is signed, I don't believe that our trade relations will skyrocket. It will be better, and I'm very pro this agreement. I think it will be a very good basics for future development. But in order to scale up, we have to rethink and maybe to reinvent our economic relations in order to understand what do we want, what do both sides want. And I believe that even though tourism and energy and brilliance, jewelry, and agricultural stuff is very good, but I think that our future is in science and technology, because there are two countries that are very interested in this particular part of the world market, let's say. I'll speak maybe about it a little bit later. I don't want to go into details and, to pinpoint each and every obstacle to our relations. I just want us to understand that I believe that even though I think that our today relations are in stalemate, we have a huge potential which lies not in the quantitative edge, but on the qualitative edge. And the quality is the science, innovations, technology, and that's the future. And day-to-day obstacles, I don't want to, if there will be questions, I would answer and say about some particular obstacles that I see from my point of view, but I don't want now to go so deep in detail in this issue. Thank you.
At this stage, I would like to ask Helena Margovsky-Lotem, who has written a brilliant article on the Israeli view on Russian-Israeli economic ties. And there she puts a question mark considering the claim that the two economies are complementary. And so when you listen to Dima Mariasis, how does it look from Jerusalem?
Good morning, my esteemed colleagues. And good morning, Dima. Good morning, Konstantin. Actually, I have the pleasure to meet you in personal during my long stay at the beautiful Moscow. And I hope that we will pass successfully these COVID not easy days and start a new era without COVID. Regarding our topic, actually, I must agree in most parts of the points that have been raised by Dmitry Mariasis, Dr. Dmitry Mariasis. Actually, I agree that the main future potential future economic relations between our states lies in the service and technologies realm. But the main problem is, as I claim in my article, is that the two states actually see as the main markets even for these technologies in the East and in the European Union. If we look at the numbers and if we look at the data, we will see that actually Israel, as Russia itself, focuses mainly on the markets of the EU and the East. Israel is also focuses mainly on the North American market. Russia for import of technologies, Israel for the export. And taking into account the limited ability of the Israeli companies, I mean, their scope, they're not big usually. It is hard to imagine how the Israeli companies will turn their exports mainly to the Russian market. So it seems to me that there are many obstacles and barriers that actually prevent from our service trade potential. I mean, by service, I mean services, technologies, know-how, etc., as you, Dimitri, mentioned. And I think that before trying to broaden these important aspects of our relations, I think that we should pay attention mainly to resolving these obstacles, these barriers. And if I may mention part of them that I personally could notice, I will mention, of course, the legal aspects, sanctions, and due diligence matters. By saying that, I mean the bilateral, especially from the Israeli side, distrust or mistrust in on the Russian partners on the due diligence matters, and the fear of laundering of money and the investments laws. By citing the barriers, possible barriers that I could see, I would mention also the cultural barriers, which usually would arise also from the mistrust, but also from the failure of the cultural proximity. The fact that most of the economic current ties are controlled, I will use this word, controlled mainly by the Russian speakers from both sides, which would usually miss the point of, realistic economic contacts between each and every country. As I cite in my article in the Chinese and Israeli case, there are not many Israelis who can speak Chinese. And yet, in the recent years, there are many Israelis that make successfully and have successful ties with Chinese partners. So the knowledge and the knowledge of language and the so-called cultural proximity is not enough factor by itself to make the contacts useful and mutually interesting. So I see that factor as a problematic one in our connections with the Russian partners. And I claim that we should take the relations from the hands of Russian speakers only. We need to broaden our scope of relations also to, Israeli-born business people. And maybe one more, of course, we should mention the sanctions regime, which is one of the biggest obstacles for the tightening of our ties with the Russian partners in the economic realm. And I will again point on that the main economic contacts between us, between Israeli businessmen, are actually with their North American colleagues. So even though Israel is not a part of the sanctions regime, there are many business people in Israel who are really, let's say, are really try to be really careful with the sanctions regime, which we should remember. It's like it's a main factor that we should consider. And I think that I will conclude at this point and say again, as my colleague Dimitri have mentioned, actually, yes, we have a great potential to broaden our relations to the services and know-how and technologies. But before going to that part, we should take the obstacles, which are a really structural one, from our main road and reconsider the ties. Maybe we should take the existing mechanisms between the countries and maybe turn them from up to down up structure. But maybe we can develop this topic later. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Indeed, it's an interesting and I will say counterintuitive point of this language trap when cultural understanding the Russian culture makes the business excellence victim here, and it's a practical point for the businessmen to consider when they think who is going to be their representative vis-a-vis the Russian Federation. So from here, I would like to turn to Dr. Simonov. You claim in your article that there is a potential for competition in the field of energy between Russia and Israel, especially in the gas export to the international markets. Could you elaborate on the economic and political aspects of this competition?
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. For me, it's also a great pleasure to be the part of today's dialogue and also to write the small part of this book concerning energy relations between Russia and Israel. I am a newcomer if we are speaking about this expert community which are dealing with relations between Israel and Russia, but I hope to continue our relations and our cooperation. When we're speaking about economic relations between Russia and other states, of course, in the majority of cases, we are speaking about energy. We are speaking about energy, and it's not a secret that Russia is the biggest exporter of hydrocarbons in the world. And also, if you see our structure of Russian export to Israel, you can see that approximately 20% of our export is still export of oil and oil products. But the main part of my article was concerning not about oil, but about gas, because it's more interesting and it's more interesting from different points of view. Also, you were speaking about the future of this story, because, you know, at the beginning of post-Soviet era, there were a lot of plans to build the pipeline from Russia to Israel, but the situation was seriously changed. And now the idea is that Israel can be an exporter of gas also to Europe. And that is why, you know, it's a very interesting example how the situation can be really changing during fast period of time. As I said, we were thinking about build the pipeline to Israel. Now Israel is thinking how to build the pipeline to European Union, and we can be not the partner, but we can be the competitor on the same market. If we are speaking about eastern and eastern part of Europe, eastern and western part of south and southeastern part of Europe, and you know, of course, this plan to build the pipeline, so-called EastMed pipeline from Israel, then to Cyprus, then to Greece. And of course, it's a very ambitious project. And also we see today's situation, because it's also a very interesting time when we see the huge increase of gas prices in European Union. And of course, if we see today's prices, we can imagine that all possible projects to export gas to European Union is more and more interesting and more and more profitable from one point of view. But also, we must understand that so today's situation, it's also a very interesting story, because it's the first energy crisis in the history of Western world, we can say, which was not organized by the exporters, but which was organized by the consumers, because, you know, it's the result of policy of European Union, which decided to build absolutely different structure of contracts, to see more hubs, more short-term contracts, and decided to eliminate long-term relations. Also, it's also interesting when we're speaking about relations between Israel and European Union, because if you want to build the pipeline, usually you must sign long-term contracts, of course, because, you know, you need to have some guarantees of consumption during, we can say, a long period of time. Because one story is LNG, a so-called flexible pipeline. Another story is pipeline. Of course, in Israel, there are several different plans. We can say one plan is to build pipeline, another plan is to build pipeline to Egypt, and then to build LNG. And of course, LNG is more flexible story. But if we are speaking about EastMed pipeline, so also you need to have long-term contracts with Europeans. but European Union during the last years said that long-term contracts is yesterday of gas business, and now we need to sign short-term contracts, and we need to have absolutely different structure of relations. EastMed pipeline is a very long pipeline. It's approximately 1,900 kilometers. It's longer than, for example, Turkish Stream, and of course longer than Nord Stream 2. And there are a lot of technical questions. But as I said, today's prices is an excellent story for Israel from one point of view. But from another point of view, we see, first of all, as I said, we see the serious change in European gas market. It's my first point. And then we see also the difficult situation with long-term consumption in Europe, because such high prices on gas is a very bad story for the consumption of gas in European Union. And that is why it's a question, what will be the amount of European market, not today, but if we are speaking about, for example, 5 or 10 years later. That's the main question, because, you know, if European Union can return to the model of competitive market, and if Europe will see the battle between gas-to-gas exporters, so-called gas-to-gas competition, and if you compare, for example, the possible price of Russian gas in east part of Europe and the possible price of Israel gas, of course, Russia still has some opportunities to be number one if we're speaking about supply of this part of Europe. And you know, for example, last news when Gazprom gave very, very low price for Serbia, $270 per 1,000 cubic meters. So that is why for Gazprom, it's a possible price. Of course, it's 3 times less than today's hub price, but for Gazprom, it's still possible to do it. And also, if you're asking me about political questions, of course, there can be not only economic problems, not only technical problems, but also political problems, not with Russia, but first of all with Turkey, because it's interesting that Turkey became the serious gas hub. You were speaking about south part of Europe with the help of Russia, and not only Russia, with the help of Brussels, because first alternative pipeline was built through Turkey. I mean the pipeline Tap-Tanap. So from Azerbaijan, this pipeline is going through Georgia, then to Turkey, and only after Turkey is going to the European part, to Bulgaria and to Greece and Italy. So that is why we see, and also Turkish Stream is also now going, then Balkan Stream is also going through Turkey. And that is why for Turkey, there is no interest to see an alternative route of gas without Turkey as the gas, we can say gas gate to the south part of Europe. So that is why it's an interesting project, but still there are a lot of problematic points, economic, technical, political, and but it's very interesting to see maybe we can say market competition between Russian gas and Israel gas in European Union.
Thank you. So, Dr. Yakimova, Dr. Mariasis have already spoken about his thoughts about free trade zone agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and Israel, and he thinks that it will not bring some skyrocketing in the trade. What do you think?
First of all, I would like to say that I'm grateful to be here today. Thank you very much for such an opportunity. And I would a little bit argue with my colleague, with Dr. Mariasis. First of all, I think that the free trade agreement between Israel and the Eurasian Economic Union could help to deepen cooperation with some actors that are now peripheral partners for Israel in this union. For example, Armenia. Here I would give one example. Armenia in 2022 plans to open its new free trade zone. It's called Gyumri, and it is based on air transport, and it can bring potential benefits for the relations between Israel and Armenia in general, because there were some consultations when this free trade zone was created, how to use the potential of both sides in order to make this project more popular. On the other hand, it can booster the general cooperation inside this free trade agreement between all the sides. But I also would like to argue with Dr. Margovsky because to my mind, of course, technique aspects are very important here when we are speaking about obstacles in striking this free trade agreement, but there are a lot more difficulties. Some of them, to my mind, are connected to the sphere of politics, where Russia, unfortunately, doesn't see in Israel a kind of systemic integration partner, because in general, Eurasian Economic Union is just a part of big integration project in Eurasia that is led by the Russian Federation. And here I would like to draw your attention to the experience of Iran, because Iran is a successful experience of integration because Iran already has an interim agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union, and now the country is doing its best to strike the permanent one, and its story of success is based on several factors. Its geography, because it is close, and logistics, and of course political sphere. And political sphere is connected not only to the fact that Russia has interests in the Middle East, and these interests are connected with Iran, but also with the fact that Iran helps to create a kind of regional environment for more close cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the Middle East. Here I'm speaking about Syria. And Syria, for example, started to show her interest in free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union at that time with the customs free between Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan in 2013. And it was the same time when Israel firstly showed its interest too. So that's why Iran also provides some opportunities to make this cooperation deeper, because now the official reason why Syria is not there, doesn't have such an agreement, is the conflict. But the experience, firstly, it was not involved in this integration project because of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, but finally it managed to become the full-scale partner inside the Eurasian Economic Union. So that's why I think that, first of all, in order to strike this agreement to be successful, Israel also needs, Israel and the other sides inside the Eurasian Economic Union need to solve somehow also political problems. And one more aspect I want to draw your attention to is Russian-Israeli relations in the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union. So Dmitry said that he does not see a huge direct impact of this free trade agreement on the possibility to boost the ties, economic ties between our countries. Here I can agree with him on the one hand, but on the other hand, to my mind, very often Russian-Israeli relations are too much focused on politics, on Middle Eastern conflict. That's why I think that this free trade agreement could help the sides a little bit shift the focus of the attention and remind that the sphere of economy is also very prospective one.
Thank you, Elizaveta. It seems that you suggest some way forward how to make an economic integration between Israel and Iran through Eurasian Economic Union. It's an interesting suggestion for the Israeli government. So let us dedicate the second part of our discussion to the future and the possible solutions for the problems that were raised by the different presenters previously. So Dr. Margovsky, what are your practical proposals to the decision makers in Moscow and Jerusalem to help the materialization of the great potential you envision for Russian-Israeli economic trade relations? What are the most promising sectors to focus on?
Well, first of all, let me thank Yelena for continuing my speech, because many obstacles that she mentioned, I've mentioned in one of my articles which is going to be published in the NSS as well. So it's good that we think together on the different, from both sides, the experts think and look in one direction. It is very good. It means that we have really potential to build something valuable and long-lasting, sustainable. Now they used to say this word. First of all, of course, many people like to speak about the tourism, and of course there is a potential. We can also speak about some different issues, but I will turn to technology and innovations. And my practical stance is that I believe that in order to build something interesting in this direction, in practical means, I think that if we start from this kind of incubation or acceleration system in Russia with the participation of Israeli representatives as mentors and investors and business mentors, it could be one of the starting points for the future development. For example, I see two major ways of this kind of cooperation. First of all is Russian technologies combined with Israeli experience in business development and joint or Israeli financial participation. Second way is more or less the same, is the formation of a joint Russian-Israeli technology team combined with Israeli experience in business development and joint or Israeli financial participation. Such possible configuration will give a Russian opportunity to bridge the gap between science and innovation and to increase the efficiency of interaction with external markets for the country beyond the raw material supply. It doesn't mean that we don't have technology companies that feel themselves well in the broader world, but I think that we have less than is possible. And due to some geopolitical issues as well, of course, but still. And this configuration will give Israel the opportunity to gain access to the Russian scientific and technical community, both to human resources and to infrastructure, to get more or less an expensive production base where it needs to have, and to expand the base of growing innovative projects of high quality, or of good quality. But in order to start even this acceleration project, the two countries have to work to make a kind of a homework and to rethink several issues. For example, I believe that we Russians, we should realize that we need the partnership, that kind of partnership, more than Israel needs. Second, we have to understand that maybe if we look at Israel, we have to reconsider our views on the Russian views on the possibility of multilateral cooperation in the innovation sphere, which is now a very acute, a very important issue to think about, and facilitates the conditions for attracting financing to venture projects in the domestic market. And to my mind, the Israeli side should stop treating Russia as a conditionally third world country in terms of technology, where you can only sell your technologies and services, which is in my practice is a very common sense. Objectively access to scientific and technical potential of Russia. And the most important, I would say, slightly transform its Israeli idea of maximizing utility in the international arena by increasing the importance of its own ecosystem as a platform through which innovative projects of other countries can be carried out under certain conditions, and not to invest all the efforts in projects formerly born, let's say, in Israel. So if we will look at it and reinvent this kind of cooperation, I think on the practical issues, if we start from this, I believe that will for sure will come to kind of a new level of better understanding each other, including these language problems, cultural problems, and will be not so important, let's say, not so important, not so acute. From this starting point, we can broaden our cooperation, and maybe we will be able to build a basic framework for a sustainable cooperation in the fields of innovations and technology. Of course, not forgetting about all the other ways of economic cooperation, services, products, if FTA, free trade agreement, of course, not forgetting about that. That's it.
Yelena, what is your prescription for how to circumvent the obstacles, and are there new institutions to be built?
Thank you. I'm not sure that I have the prescription, but I should agree with Dr. Mariasis actually again and again, as we both of us interestingly have pointed out, we need to broaden our know-how, technology, high-tech relations dimension. And it also connects to what Dr. Elizaveta has mentioned regarding the Eurasian Economic Union, or might be connecting. And there are several problems with that union, which the main of which is the potential agreement does not include a service, services part. So we are speaking just on broadening the goods trade, which is a problem by itself. And again, I will go back to the point of high technology. I dramatically agree with Dr. Mariasis. On the Israeli part, we should abandon, and we may abandon actually, the huge mistrust, which has its origins on many factors, but again, as I mentioned before, is a failure of cultural proximity. Yes, so I believe we need to broaden the relations also, not just to the Russian speakers. Israel needs to take a pivot to Russia, if I may use this term, as we at the time 3-4 years ago used the pivot to Asia, to China, which proved itself to be really successful. And we need, I think that we have some good existing formal mechanism that are aimed to broaden, deepen the relation, economic one, but we need this mechanism which include Joint Economic Commission, Rosnano, cooperation with the Innovative Authority of Israel, etc. All of them go from up to down. I think that we need to include the business circles in this mutual discourse to see what are the business circles' needs, what are their interests in the Russian abilities. And yes, we, the experts, we know that Russia has the ability, innovative ability, also not just in the science realm, but also many proven abilities in the sphere of technologies. In fact, many Western companies outsource their work and needs, technological ones, to Russia. So again, I will summarize by saying and pointing out that we need to take this discourse to more practical, less formal maybe level, to broaden the ties also to the business circles of both countries, and to incorporate the business discourse with the formal one in the formal existing mechanisms, and maybe to invent or reinvent some new ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Konstantin, when I look into the future, so how does Moscow views this? How does Moscow view the threat of competition in gas realm from Israel? And another issue is the issue of climate change. How does it influence our possible energy cooperation?
You know, if we are speaking about gas competition, we are not afraid of market competition, as I said. So it's not a problem for us. We are afraid of not market competition with using of political methods. But climate change is an excellent question. And of course, it's a very interesting question because, you know, and it's interesting that in my opinion, Russia and Israel, they're in the same boat if we are speaking about the influence of climate agenda on energy sector. Why? Because, you know, it's maybe strange because, of course, Israel is, we can say, south country. There are a lot of sun, and that's why it's possible to think that it's a good idea to develop, for example, solar energy in Israel. But, you know, if you see the today's figure and today's data, you will see that in Israel energy balance, the share of renewables is still a little bit more than 5%. So, the consumption of hydrocarbons in Israel today is, you know, in comparative, of course, units is 20 times higher than the consumption of renewable energy. Even the consumption of coal is still 3 times higher in Israel than the consumption of renewables. And that's why if we're speaking about the development of, but of course, I see the very rapid development of renewables in Israel. It's approximately 60–70% during the last several years. And if we're speaking about last 10 years, the average increasing of renewable energy production is approximately 40% in Israel. Of course, in Russia, we don't see such figures, but you know, it's still the energy only for the local consumption. If Israel wants to be like Russia, an export energy power and export energy state, of course, it's impossible to export renewables. That's why we can see the substitute of maybe coal, first of all, in Israel, then maybe the substitute of oil by renewables in Israel. But that's why it means that you will have more opportunity to export gas, because you know it's not profitable to export renewables. The price of transportation of electricity is 7 times higher than the price of transportation of gas. So this figure is, we can say, can kill all ideas of export of electricity. Because you know we also have such plans. And Elena, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned Rosnano company. You know, it's also a good example of that. You know, the development of renewables cannot be an easy story in Russia or maybe in Israel, because now you know maybe you don't know the last news from Russia. Rosnano now is on bankruptcy process because Rosnano is a bankrupt company. Rosnano cannot pay for their bonds. And it's, you know, the unique story because it's a state company. And now we see the process of bankruptcy. So forgot about cooperation with Rosnano. It's not possible to cooperate with bankrupt company. But Rosnano was one of the biggest investors to renewables in Russia. Also, it was a big investor to solar energy. Now we see the result of this story. So that is why I think that if we're speaking about the future, of course, climate agenda will have a serious impact to the production of hydrocarbons. It means maybe that the battle between the producers of hydrocarbons can be more serious. But, you know, if we're speaking about next 20–30 years, I'm absolutely sure that, you know, hydrocarbons will still be the main part of energy balance of the world. They will still be the main energy balance of Russia, of course, and maybe Israel too. And if Israel wants to export something, if we're speaking about energy sector, first of all, of course, Israel must think about gas. It's not possible to export electricity from Israel. And that's why I return to my first point. We're not afraid of real market competition with Israel. I think that we can find place for Russian gas and also for Israel gas. You know, we still have some arguments to continue to be number one, if we're speaking about east and southeast part of European Union.
Thank you. And the last question will go to Elizaveta Yakimova. So there is this asset Israel has, the Jewish diaspora in post-Soviet space. So can it play a more important role in upgrading our economic ties with Russia? And how practically can it be done?
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, it seems to me that it's better to use not the term diaspora, but it's of course important for Israel. But here in Russia, I would prefer to use the term Jewish community, Russian-speaking Jewish community, and Israeli Jewish community with Russian background, which now is not similar to the Russians in brackets as we used to call them in the late 1990s. So if we are speaking about the possibility of these two groups of people to influence somehow the relations between our countries in the sphere of economy, I would rather prefer us to enter the epoch of expert entrepreneurship when Israelis with different backgrounds, with different origin, try to present here in Russia their ideas, their business ideas that are demanded here, and vice versa. Because having even short experience of work with the Russian-Israeli Business Council, I noticed that somehow people from the Russian Jewish community and from the Israeli Jewish community with Russian background, they're presenting their ideas on the basis of their background without thinking where it would be possible or not. But it seems to me that this factor must be taken into account because of two things. First of all, statistically, if we are looking at the example of the United States of America, all immigrants are more inventive. They more tend to be self-employed and work in the sphere of innovation, for example. And the second factor is our current pandemic reality. When it will be over, I hope someday we maybe will see the growth of Aliyah from the post-communist states, from the Russian Federation, and this group of people will also be included into this community, and they also may try to start to use their innovative potential, and they could somehow help our side. And also, I would like to make a short remark, since Yelena stressed the issue of services in the free trade agreement between Israel and the Eurasian Economic Union. I'm very often criticized for using this example, but we have now free trade agreement between Israel and Ukraine, and here the sides choose to make trade of goods be the first, and now they're trying to negotiating the aspect of our services. And for me, as I already explained to you my ideas about Iranian model, Ukraine is also a kind of model. And we can use it even not as something to automatically repeat, but at least as something that we can learn from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that we had very fruitful discussion, and thank you all the panelists both for your insight and for your ability to squeeze your ideas into this tight timetable. I must summarize so that at least from my perspective, there are preconditions for Russia and Israel to play a more important role in the respective economies of each other. And this aspect of economic cooperation can cement and broaden the basis of our relationship and produce partial safeguard net against any eventuality of political tensions. I think that this discussion brings us the main lesson that we have to make our homework, as Elena mentioned, and work hard to remove the stumbling blocks on the road of this, on fulfilling this cooperation, build new mechanisms for better understanding, for bridging the gaps between our business cultures. And there is a lot of work for our governments and business community to do. So thank you again. and we'll continue our cooperation both with Institute of Oriental Studies and with Financial University and with Dr. Simonov, and I hope that with Elena also. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.